Hi, and welcome to the Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast presented by Wolf Precision Incorporated, where we learn about and share long range shooting and custom rifle building. I am your host, Jamie Dotson, and welcome to the show. Hi, and welcome to episode 25 of Wolf Precision's Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast. I am your host, Jamie Dotson, and welcome back to the show. In this episode, we are going to continue on our fundamentals series, and in this one, we're going to be talking about follow-through and cycling the bolt. Also, we want to talk about the arrow and the Me Too that's been going on for the last couple of years, and the impact it's had not only on the industry, but the quality of the products that are being pushed around, and why more isn't better. So we have an industry that's struggling. We have a bunch of Me Too's popping up everywhere, and I think it's a conversation worth having. So I want to thank you for taking the time for joining us. We got lots to talk about, and without further ado, here we go. So in this podcast, we want to continue on with our fundamentals series, and we've been breaking each part and component down into ways that we as a shooter want to approach shooting a rifle and some things to pay attention to. And follow through is one of those things that is a huge part. So here at the school, especially when we get into the first day, we'll have a lot of students ask, we're on the firing line in the afternoons and applying everything that we taught in the classroom that day. And while the students are shooting, it's common for them to look up to myself or one of the other instructors there and ask, hey, where did that bullet go? Now, we're shooting paper at 100 yards, and we have lots of different targets that we shoot for lots of different reasons. A lot of times we don't tell you why we're shooting a particular series of targets. Everything we do is designed really around teaching, and so we just don't haphazardly stick up this target or that target and just, shoot, and we'll shoot this one next type deal. But so there's a reason behind everything that we shoot, but it's really common while you're in the middle of a drill for a student to turn around and ask, hey, where did that one go? Or how's that look? And I am sitting there looking at them, and I smile and I shrug my shoulders and I say, I don't know. We'll find out when we look through the spot scope, and we'll find out together. And they sort of look at you a little confused, and their head will tilt just a little bit. But the first day, I'm getting behind the spotting scope, and I'm looking at people's groups, and I'm trying to evaluate what's going on there. But actually, I'm spending a lot of time watching them shoot. Because follow through on how the rifle's behaving, how it's moving into the shooter, with the shooter, what it's doing during and after recoil, knowing what you're looking for can help really draw the shooter into an area that's much more better for them to be in. Not critiquing, but picking out to say, hey, listen, you guys are in a dance here, and you and this rifle just aren't working together and coming up with a really great, routine here. So there's some issues. And it allows us to recognize some things that we can change up really efficiently to help the shooter get the best shot that they can and to have a level of consistency there. So we're looking for a way that the rifle is going to interact with the shooter properly so that the shot goes downrange where it's supposed to go. And then we're also going one step further and saying, okay, we have to make this a repeatable process because we can't have you get on the rifle one time and the bullet go where it's supposed to go, and then the next time it's going somewhere else because you're doing something different. This is all through follow-through. This is a hard one to try to explain over the air, maybe, because I can't physically, we're not sitting here looking at a shooter. So I'm going to do my best in words to describe what we're looking for and how things are supposed to work on the firing line. When we have a shooter shooting, how they're positioned behind the rifle, the things that they're doing while the rifle is under recoil plays a big difference on the repeatability from shot to shot. This is something that's easy to learn on a small caliber or a medium-sized caliber with a muzzle breaker suppressed. This is a really hard one to learn with magnums. The reason I say that is magnums and heavy recoiling rifles or light hunting rifles, when you pull the trigger, they are coming back so violently and fast. They're doing all of these things. They hide what you're doing wrong from you personally, the shooter. This can be really seen when you take a shooter that's closed the bolt on an empty round, which we've all seen. You know, the empties change. The magazine's empty. They've closed the bolt. You know it's empty, but they don't. And they pull the trigger, and they flinch, shake, do all kinds of funny things. Everybody gets a little bit of a laugh out of it, and maybe pokes a little bit of fun. But on the teaching side of that, is they just didn't do it that one time. They've been doing that every time they've shot. And the recoil of the rifle is hiding it from them, the shooter. And so being able to pick up what they're doing under recoil, especially in the harder recoiling rifles, is pretty hard to do. Medium to small calibers, learn what that rifle is supposed to do as it recoils into the shooter and settles back down forward, and grow this level of consistency. For the longest time, the school rifles were in 223. We didn't want muzzle brakes on the firing line. It was just too much. And I've often said that it's better to teach you the skill set to shoot a rifle to its fullest potential than try to win with horsepower. So for nearly a decade, our school rifles were 223 shooting 75 grain bullets, and we would run them to 1,000 yards in every class. And it was one of my favorite things to do. Now, the bullet combination and the ammunition that we used, we made ourselves, because the 223 is not specifically designed to be consistently shot to 1,000 yards. So they were sort of specialty, but outside of just, the right bullet and powder combination, the rifles were designed to train. And I always tell people I could teach you twice as much, twice as fast, taking equipment out of the equation. So I tell people coming to the shooting school all the time when they ask, they say, hey, I have this rifle or I have that rifle, and I'd like to bring it to the school because I want to learn my rifle. And I want to be careful that, I don't offend the customer and make them insist that we're using a school rifle, although we do now. But I tell them that a lot of times that's sort of the wrong thing to look at coming here to this school. We're here to teach you the art. And a lot of times what you'll learn is just the limits of your own equipment. And that can really make for just a not enjoyable school. When you and your rifle are off the line a day and a half into the school because it's not performing, and you have to pick up a school rifle, or you don't have enough dope, or the scope's not tracking, this is the wrong place to be having those issues. It would be like going to a NASCAR driving school and asking them if you can take the family minivan out on the track because you want to learn to drive that way, but you want to do it with your minivan. It's the wrong place for that. Now, the advanced classes like, our Movers Clinic or King of the Mountain that we do in West Virginia, I want to encourage you to bring your own rifle there. I want to encourage you to bring your own rifle back through the school the second time through. But the first time through, I want you to learn the art of what we do, not your equipment, because totally two different concepts. I always told people I could teach you twice as much, twice as fast by taking equipment out, because we use really low recoiling rifles, and heavy rifles at that. They allow you to learn what the rifle's supposed to do under recoil consistently. So when a rifle recoils, it's got this pulse. It comes back and bumps you the shooter and settles back forward again. This has to be consistent. Under recoil, any place that you're touching, pushing, or pulling excessive pressure, or trying to will the rifle to do something it doesn't naturally want to do, well, all of that comes into play as soon as the rifle recoils, because it's coming off the ground. It's almost like zero gravity. If you can think about, like, now that it's in motion rearward, there's nothing pinning it to the ground. So all these places you're touching, pushing, and pulling can influence the shot. And so you have to be willing to sit there, pull the trigger, maintain all of that grip, pressure, everywhere you're touching the rifle, let it naturally come back and bump you, the shooter, and fall back forward without you changing anything or manipulating the shot in any way, shape, or form. Easy to do on a low recoiling rifle. So, for example, our 223s. Easy, easy, easy. It was like halfway through the first day, you would think that these new shooters have been doing this their whole lives. They're shooting quarter-inch dots and third-inch dots over and over again at 100 yards. That's fundamentals of marksmanship. When you get into the heavier recoiling rifles, like the Magnums or lightweight hunting rifles that sometimes people want to bring through the school, they hide all of this from you. And so, yes, you get to pull the trigger and you're sending the round down range, but you're missing all of this learning that you should be learning here at the school. And you can't. Once you learn the art of what we do here at the school, you can apply it to anything you'll ever shoot from here on out. So when you learn on a lower recoiling rifle and you recognize what this is supposed to feel like, you can now apply that to a Magnum within your own limits of how many of these you can take before you start to fundamentally fall apart and learn some bad habits of flinching. But to shoot a Magnum is like sitting there, getting all of your fundamentals ironed out, and with good follow-through, you're ready to break the trigger. You've gone through this entire mental checklist. So you've got, your natural point of aim. You and the rifle are working as a team. You've got your firm handshake grip. You're loosening your pinky up a little bit. You've got pressure built into the rifle, pushing, pulling, or both, into your shoulder, 2 to 3 pounds. You've got your cheek pressure. Feels great, exactly where it's supposed to be, the exact amount of pressure. Natural respiratory pause. And at that moment, 80% of your focus is on the trigger, 20% is on the target. And your focus is now to break that trigger cleanly back to you, the shooter, straight in line with the barrel into your shoulder. And as soon as that gun cracks, you have to absolutely do nothing other than let that rifle launch back into you, bump you, and fall back forward without you changing anything. You can't release the rear bag if you're gripping the rear bag with your left hand. You can't let your finger pop off the trigger because you were squeezing the trigger so lightly that your finger's in there bouncing around. You have to maintain that firm handshake grip through the recoil, and you have to let the rifle naturally do what it wants to do and then fall back forward. Easier said than done, because on Magnums, it's sort of like playing that 6-inch game with Mike Tyson. Eventually, you're going to cave in mentally. You know it's coming, and you know it's really going to hurt when it gets there. And so when the gun cracks, you're actually trying to resist the rifle. You're pushing away from it. You've got your head held back. You're doing all of these things to keep the rifle away from you, from hitting you that hard, or to try to tolerate it in a different manner because the last one really hurt, right? So learning it on a Magnum is impossible. Medium recoil rifles is hard. Low recoiling rifles is where it should be. So our school rifles are heavy, and coming this fall, they'll be suppressed. With more than a decade of doing this and going through this process that we've adopted here at the school, it's amazing to watch new shooters focusing on fundamentals grow, and within a day, you would think they were shooting like this for the last decade. You would think they were marksmen from the day they were born. A good example would be a young girl we had in the class. Her name was Amanda. She was 14 or 15 at the time, and beside her was a retired Marine who was head of some global security for this major corporation. Never shot beyond 200 yards a day in her life. By the end of day 2, she was just stomping him into the ground. It was amazing. And everybody was really good sports about it. Everybody was just having lots of fun. But she took to this. The lights went on about how fundamentals work, how the rifle is supposed to behave, and it was just off to the races. And I can tell you this story with a different name 1,000 or more times of they're shooting, they're getting it, they're working through these fundamentals of how this is supposed to work. It's a little confusing, and all of a sudden, bang, the lights come on. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is easy. And you'll hear people say that all the time. And if you've got your fundamentals down, it really is. It really is. So what was really cool with that scenario, by day 3, we were doing some holdover drills. From the standing position, we gave the shooters 5 seconds to get on the gun and be ready to shoot. There was a shoot-off out to 700 yards, first round hits. Her and one other shooter. From the standing position to where her second round impacted the target was 17 seconds, with no touching of the elevation knob or the windage knobs. And fundamentally, sound as can be. That's what shooting's all about. That's what we're trying to do. Enjoy the sport. Stretch your legs out. Talk some smack now and then, right? So it was really awesome. It really got me pumped back up as to, teaching, because it's amazing to watch people get into this sport and you can just watch they absolutely fall in love with it. And, the last couple of years have been a lot of that. And so it's rejuvenating to me as a shooter to say, hey, that's pretty cool, get to share this and pass it on. But the key to this all, building up to this point, is follow through. And the art of remaining still through recoil, letting the rifle do what it naturally wants to do. Sometimes pain included. And fall back forward without you negatively influencing the shot. But you really can't will the bullet. You can't grab the rifle and force it to go where you want it to go. At that point, it's got to be repeatable and behave the same each time, and that bullet will get down the range and hit what it's supposed to every single time. So when you're focusing on follow through, remember it's maintaining all these contact points with the same pressure. When that trigger breaks, maintaining all of that through recoil without loosening or changing any of it. Let the rifle naturally come back, bump into you, fall forward. You should be looking back at the same target, and in most cases, watching the round impact the target. That is good follow through. To build on follow through, and one last thing I want to follow up on this subject is, if you really want to become efficient in shooting at long range and quick, work the bolt with your face on the gun. Don't pick your face up off the rifle to work the bolt to put another fresh round in the chamber. So if you're going to shoot a particular target twice, or you're in a match and you're shooting multiple targets from a particular position, if you're able to stay in that position, work your bolt with your face still on the gun, so you don't have to start building these steps from scratch each and every time. It allows you to sort of fast track going through this mental checklist, because you still have your proper eye relief, you still have your cheek pressure, you're reloading, resetting quickly through your mental checklist, and the next round goes downrange. That's how it's supposed to work. So always get in the habit of, when you're working the bolt to put another fresh round in the chamber, especially if you're a hunter doing a quick follow-up shot, or if you're a competition shooter, work your bolt with the face on the gun. The only exception to this, of course, is in long action. Sometimes the bolt is too far back. You take a chance of hitting yourself in the glasses or hit yourself in the face with a long action bolt throw if you're that far forward on it. But on most of your short action rifles, you really don't have to be that close, and the bolt's not going to come that and hit you in the face when you work it. So keep your face on the gun. Now, our next podcast, on episode 26, we're going to tie this together in almost like a little mental checklist that I use. I still use it today, and put the formula together in a working format that we would use in the field to sort of start growing this and get your feet underneath you and start learning to run with this quicker and more efficiently. So at first it is a little slow, but we'll give you some pointers and try to how to speed this up and how to make sort of your own mental checklist on this one. Now, I call this the arrow and the Me Too, two separate subjects, but I want to talk about both of them real quick. When we started working on building a purpose-built rifle or a custom rifle, there was a lot of things that was accepted as, well, that's just the way we do it here. And that's just the way it's always been done. And we heard this a lot, or I heard this a lot. And as a shooter, and I always say that I love to shoot. That's what got me into this. As a shooter, I didn't buy into that. You know, when you're trying to achieve the best accuracy you can, it really goes down to the finest points and finest details. And so we were breaking each component down, you know, from designing our own proprietary action with Bat Machine. You know, Bat Machine was a bench rest builder. They didn't offer a Remington 700 footprint. And so I think we started this whole process somewhere around 2011 of coming up with a fieldable bolt action rifle that was made the way it should be made. Now, this is spurred across the board in every part and piece. So we were really particular that we weren't just a Me Too company coming out with a Me Too action and a Me Too stock. And hey, I'm making triggers now. I mean, we'll talk about that in a minute. But our goal wasn't to come up with another version of something else. I mean, if everybody copied everybody and made the same thing that everybody was making, would any of it be as good as the original? The answer would be no. There's more to it than just copying it. But we wanted to take what they knew in accuracy and what we believed made a difference in accuracy and apply it to the field. So you'll hear this common, especially with your bench rest actions, that, well, they don't belong in the field. Their tolerances are too tight. Well, for those that are saying that to you, a lot of times they have their own intentions involved in this. Because believe it or not, it's actually the opposite that's true. You see, bolts don't bind in a bolt bore raceway because the action's too tight. Not if they're made correctly. Bolts bind in a raceway actually when the tolerances are kept too loose. Because as you close the bolt forward, the bolt kicks sideways inside the action's bolt bore raceway and it binds. Even worse is they have to make these exceptionally large because a lot of times the actions are either warped in the heat treat process or the bolt itself is not perfectly straight and true. And so if you have one piece that's not perfectly straight and true trying to run through the other, then you've got binding. So you'll see it sometimes with an action or you'll close the bolt and halfway through closing it, you'll feel it sort of drag a little bit, oddly. And then when you open it, it starts smoothing. You just feel this little drag somewhere in it. Well, that's binding. That means the bolt's warped. Something's not cut perfectly straight true to the other. It could be conal. I mean, there's all these issues that can get involved in this. But the one thing that absolutely is not true, and why Bat Machine actions run like they do. So when you take bench rest, so we want to congratulate Mr. Steve Virch, who just took third place in the World Open Bench Rest competition. He missed first place, I believe. He took third. He missed first place by his group being 3 inches left at 1,000 yards on his last relay. So congratulations, Steve. And he did that with a bat tactical action, not the bench rest version. And we're really proud that, he chose us, as a builder. But that's what our actions were designed to do, was shoot like they're a bench rest action, but survive in the field. The tight bolt bore raceway isn't about whether or not dirt and debris can move around in there. We have specially designed flutes in the bolt body itself that work as swipes as you're working the bolt back and forth for a place for the dirt to go. These flutes are also cut at a specific design, depth, and twist rate, so it's not ratcheting rounds underneath the bolt as you're lifting and working it back and forth. The bolts are designed from the ground up not to drag and bind and gall in a bolt bore raceway because the actions are stainless and the bolts are chrome moly. This was done on purpose. We know as hunters and in match shooters, especially what we do, it's going to rain on us and we're going to take everything and wipe it down and dry. Or we're going to take in a hunting trip, we're going to fall, and we're going to get everything all dirty. Or we're going to be in a windstorm and everything's going to be covered in dirt and debris. We want you to be able to take your bolt out, wipe everything down, clean it up. We might not always have oil. So if you can't re-lubricate the bolt and it's stainless on stainless, it will stick regardless of how it's cut. It will gall your lugs. So we did a preemptive strike on that. The bolt is made out of chromoly, the action's stainless, so they can't stick together. Then we even went another route, and we said, okay, to even make this more bulletproof in the field, we chose the salt bath nitride, both parts and pieces. So these harden the surfaces, giving them a whole nother level of protection, so that not only will they not stick together, but even dirt and debris won't grind into the surfaces, mar them, make them abrasive on each other. So the bad actions run, if you talk to bench rest shooters, I mean, they're shooting 10 shots as downrange as fast as they can get them in there. If these things were binding in the smallest amount, don't you think the bench rest guys would run away kicking and screaming? But the bad actions are actually one of the most popular actions in bench rest. Look at King of 2 Mile. Bad action owns it right now. I mean, there's so many guys shooting that. And they're shooting in dirt and debris with giant muzzle brakes, dirt flying around everywhere. They don't run that way because they're loose. They actually run that way because they're made perfectly straight and true, and they're made to the right tolerance. So they can't kick sideways and bind in a bolt bore raceway. So for the action people out there that are throwing that out there, we don't want to use a bench rest action in tactical matches. Well, I'll tell you one more quick story. The very first prototype that we ran was serial number BT001. Took it to the Allegheny Sniper Challenge in August of 2011. It was the very first prototype. My goal at the 3-day match event was to run it through the sniper match without wiping or cleaning the rifle. So we shot from barns, dirt, it rained on us, debris. I mean, pretty brutal match for 3 days. Sand, dirt, being tossed around off the roads. Not only did the rifle performed just absolutely flawlessly. So the last stage was called Last Man Standing. You had your teammates single feed from the side of the rifle. You had to hit the target. You had something like 15 seconds to shoot it as many times as you could. And I think I got 7 or 8 rounds off. I mean, it was absolutely amazing. That was the last stage of the last day. What was really cool about that whole thing was not only did the rifle run flawless, which is the whole reason for being there, but I actually won the match, which was the icing on the cake. I mean, I just can't tell you. The smile on my face was there for days, just frozen. How cool was that? That we've taken this world-class action and we've thought about it in all these aspects to make it the ultimate fieldable, accurate action. And that's where it's been ever since. Now, there's lots of clones to the bat tactical action out there. You'll see some different variants. But in the end, the quality is there, and you hear people talk about the bolt bore raceway and the reason they loosen theirs up and you shouldn't run a bench rest action in sniper matches. Just know that it's sort of call BS on that one. And for the reasons that I explained, know that actually it's the opposite. It's true. Now, let's talk about the Me Too movement that's going on right now. And not the Me Too movement that you see hashtag this and hashtag that. I'm talking about the thing that's going on in the gun industry, where everybody's copying everybody else and coming out with products that look, feel, cheaper, faster. Everybody wants to get into the gun industry, it seems. Most of them aren't interested in making guns. They're most interested in making money. So you've got a lot of people jumping in and buying companies or starting companies. I mean, this was a big AR craze years ago where the market was just flooded with everybody and their brother making AR-15s. The problem is the quality suffers. And we're to the point now we are in the bolt action rifle area where I believe in 2002, if I looked up the estimates properly, there was something like 3 million bolt action rifles sold. And now we're up to something like 8 million. A lot of that is Me Too stuff going on, and it's watering and filtering down. But nobody's really changing anything. Everybody's just sort of copying each other, and they might come out with a new 1911 that has a different color, or a different stock design that has a different recoil pad, or this anniversary edition of this, that, or the other thing. But where's the ingenuity at? Where's the person saying from ground up, hey, we're redesigning this, and we're going to make it better. We're going to make some major... So you have people that are making small incremental improvements. Sure, the stocks have made great improvements from the first rifle stock to now. It used to be about a lock, stock, and barrel. So a lock, which was the trigger, has gotten so much better. But really, it's just incremental improvements over time. Nothing ground shaking, just a little tweak here, a little tweak there. At some point, though, it's how much more can you tweak before something else really has to come along and shake some things up. So we had a comment made. The reason I'm talking about all this is we were never a Me Too. I was never interested in doing what anybody else did. From the ground up, we wanted to make a rifle that stood out and that every part and piece was right. Not almost or good enough or what everybody else is doing. We don't do that. Our pursuit was for excellence. And we thought if we strive to make something perfect, then maybe we could come out with an excellent product. And that's what we've done through the barrel, using Krieger, proof research now for the carbon fiber, with the actions, actually working with Bat Machine to develop our own and bringing that bench rest quality into the field of hunting and tactical shooting. Triggers, trying to work with the best of who's coming up with the best product at the time. If we have some input to make it better, we'll throw it out there. Stocks, well, we're not stock makers, but I know the difference between a good quality stock and a poor one. And there's a ton of Me Too chassis out there, and there's a lot of reasons why we choose the stocks we do. So, for example, we use Macmillan a lot for the consistent quality, but there's things on the inside that we don't share that are really important to making really high consistent quality rifles, because the stock is where the rubber meets the road. So we have some things done inside there that are always done to our rifles with no exception. A lot of people don't do. The heart of it, though, is the barrel. And when we started picking pieces apart, and I call this the arrow syndrome. Someone had made the comment that how does adding another part to the rifle make it any better? So they're referring to the ACE or the accurizing chamber extension. And I thought, first, I guess I could see where that point would come from, but then, okay, how does adding a part make this better? Well, if we didn't start taking things into smaller pieces to make each individual part better, there's a lot of things in this world that wouldn't exist. So, for example, we would still be riding around in covered wagons with wooden wheels. Think about how many parts are involved in making a tire. Think about, and my best example would be the arrow. So if we use the same thought process, well, how does making another part make it any better? You're adding a part to this. My gosh, you're going to ruin it. So how can adding a part make any difference? If we apply that same thought to the arrow and the modern arrow, we would still be picking sticks up and sharpening them and cutting a notch in the back with our knife for the nock, and that's how we would be killing animals. So I want you to think about the arrow for a minute. If you take the modern carbon arrow and how many components are in that arrow and how making these individual components better makes a better arrow. So, for example, we don't sharpen sticks anymore. Instead, at the end of the arrow or the shaft, there's an insert, a threaded insert that's installed. That now allows us to make the tip independent of the arrow. Allows us to make razor broadheads, blunt tips, folding broadheads. Something you could not do if you tried to make that part of the arrow. We make that part better, and then we put it on the arrow. Same thing with the nock. At the end of the arrow, it's hollow shaft. We now manufacture a nock and stick in there. And we now manufacture the feathers or the vanes that are going to go on there, and they're stuck on there. So an arrow isn't just an arrow anymore. How does adding a part to that make it any better? My argument would be that adding all those parts made everything better. When you get into the rifle and the ACE system, we're fixing problems. we're solving the problem of being able to cut a perfectly straight chamber. It's not part of the barrel. We can cut a perfectly straight throat into the barrel because the chamber is no longer in the way. And we can do it in the straightest portion of the barrel, not in the middle or several inches in where the curvature of the bore starts. So by us removing the chamber, we can now make both parts better and assemble them afterwards. Same thing we do with the modern arrow. So when you're getting out there and you're selecting rifles, and I'm seeing this now on some of the forums that all of these actions have been dumped on the market, and this new action here, and this new action is being hyped up there, and then 2 years later, I mean, I'm old enough now that I can sort of see this revolving door of how it works is, well, everybody's now ganging up on that action because it doesn't feed right, or this is happening, or that's happening. And so I think when you're getting into this quality of rifle, just be careful. A, that you're not just buying into another Me Too product. That when you're purchasing the product, that it's somebody that's not interested in making money off the industry, but it's somebody trying to better the industry and leave it in a better place that they found it, coming up with a lot of their own ingenuitive designs and stuff that has been learned over 10, 20, and 30 years of being involved in this industry, of trying just to make the product better. We have customers that have come through the school with a lot of different rifles, and we see it all the time. $7,000 rifle that won't print an inch group at 100 yards because the stock is flexing and bowing on the forearm because they made it too light. So just be careful when you spend your hard-earned money that you just don't fall for the other Me Too, because the Me Too people are only interested in trying to cash in or cash out on this industry, and it's sort of flooded the market. Now, the good part about all this is it will weed itself out. And you see a lot of the bankruptcies going on right now, and you see a lot of people leaving and exiting the industry in sort of boat-rows. And I think it's going to continue that way until we go back down to where it's the people that were focusing on quality and building a great business inside the industry to make product and not just make money. They will slowly rise back to the top again. I'm pretty confident in that. But I did want to throw that out there, that the Me Too stuff going on in this industry, we were at the NRA show, and it's just mind-blowing on just how much of the stuff is the same stuff that everybody else is doing. It's just being copied. And so be mindful that you're not buying a copycat. It's not the real thing. So we had some questions and answers we wanted to try to cover in this particular podcast, and I'm trying not to make it too long because really we're still trying to stay focused on the fundamental portions. But we had another customer ask about barrel length, and we were going back and forth between something like the 6.5 PRC and the 6.5 Creedmoor. And I thought it was really a good question to maybe bring up and talk about on the podcast for a couple minutes. And the customer made his decision, and I want to share with you his thoughts on after the decision. So he was building a hunting rifle, and his shots are within reason. Maybe an exceptional long shot might be 700 yards, but thank God for bow hunters because they've convinced us that we can get closer to about everything. And he was, whether or not he wanted to do a 6.5 PRC or whether he wanted to do a 6.5 Creedmoor. And this is a common conversation that we have. And I shared with him my opinion, and I always offer my opinion, but I don't want to build your rifle for you with picking out the parts and pieces. I still want you to build what you want. We'll just build it. That's what we want to do. So I'll offer you my opinion, but I try not to take over the process and say, well, this is what you want to build. He chose the 6.5 Creedmoor. And after he attended our school here and did some shooting and thinking on his own, there was a lot of reasons he was happy. And he made the right decision, I believe. I call it the 5 or 10% rule. A lot of our rifles are shorter barrels, so 18.5, 22, 26 for a match gun, but mostly 22-inch for our suppressed guns, and 18.5 for what we would consider our pursuit rifle, which is our lightweight version hunting rifle. What we find is there's such little to gain velocity-wise. So, for example, going in 22-inch PRC, we did some testing here, and we broke 2,900 feet per second after the rifle was broken in. But we're also shooting close to 2,700, if not 2,715, with a 6.5 Creedmoor in the same bullet. And so we've picked up, at 200 feet per second, even if it's 250 feet per second, in the grand scheme of things, at 200 feet per second, you still didn't pick up 10% velocity. At 250, you still didn't pick up a 10% increase in velocity. Now, you're feeding and functioning a much longer round. A round that's absolutely maxed out in a short action. Not that I'm an anti-PRC guy, but I'm just pointing out the obvious. You have to buy a special magazine to feed that 2.9, 50 cartridge. And long cartridges can be a little bit more finicky to feed and function. You've got the cost of the ammunition, way more expensive to feed. You've got recoil, a lot more recoil. Barrel life, of course, much less barrel life. All that for 200, 250 feet per second. Less than 10%. So I have this thing called the 5 and 10% rule, or the 5-10 rule. In a short action cartridge, match gun, for example, if I'm not picking up 5% in velocity or better, then, I'll choose accuracy every single time. So for an example in this particular argument, you take the 6.5 by 47 Lapua compared to the 6.5 Creedmoor. The limiting factor here would be if you're reloading or not. If you're not reloading, well then obviously the 6.5 Creedmoor is a great way to go. But if you are reloading, the 6.5 by 47 Lapua is a far superior cartridge in accuracy. And you still fall within that 5% rule. So in other words, there's no reason to shoot the 6.5 Creedmoor because of the velocity. You're not picking up more than maybe 5%. So the 6.5 by 47 Lapua in the same rifle with same barrel length is probably within 100 or 125 feet per second of the hardest push 6.5 Creedmoor. So I will take accuracy over speed any day. So I'm not going to jump around cartridges to pick up less than 5% in velocity. Not only that, but then the same concept applies. I'm shooting a more efficient case, a better case design, one that feeds and functions, awesome, and lower recoil. All that for giving up 4% in velocity. That's amazing. And so that's my rule for short action to short action. Now, non-magnum to magnum, I call it the 10% rule. If I'm not going to pick up at least 10% in velocity, unless it's a necessity that I have to have that velocity. So, for example, if you're shooting King of the 2 Mile, then, okay, I can see where this is going to play a difference. But on a hunting rifle, PRS sniper match type rifle where you might be shooting out to 1250, I'm not going to bump up to a magnum for less than 10% because the trade-offs aren't worth it. So, for example, why would I trade in the 6.5 Creedmoor for the 6.5 PRC going from 27.30 to 29.30? I'm less than 10% increase in velocity, but I've got all the negatives that come along with it. Increased recoil, increased cost, shorter barrel life, not feeding and functioning as quickly or smoothly as some of the other short action cartridges. For less than 10%, I'm not even going to look at it. And even at that, over 10% maybe. So for example, like the 308, of course. Now the 308 is a great cartridge. It runs, 168 grain bullet at, 175 grain bullet at 2,600 feet per second or 2,650. Well, to get up to a 300 Win Mag, now you're 2950, 3,000, pretty big difference. So if you need that extra energy to push that bullet harder, if you're a big game hunter at distance, well, there's a big significant difference between a 308 and a 300 Win Mag. And so at that point, as long as you're okay with the trade-offs of the cost and barrel life and recoil, then it's probably worth jumping up to that if that bullet and that caliber is required at distance. But if it's not, if you're only picking up, 125 feet per second, is it really worth it? Especially in hunting scenarios as well, because you can always sneak 40 yards closer if you really had to. If the animal's at 700 yards and he's not really paying much attention to you, in most cases, you could probably sneak a little closer if you wanted to. Bow hunters do it all the time. So I just want to throw that out there of the 5-10 rule that I have and sort of my thought behind it. So the customer chose the 6.5 Creedmoor. And, I always sort of caution this because I don't want to persuade them that that's what they should use. But in the end, he come back and after the shooting school and all of his work was done, and he was like, I am so glad that I went with the 6.5 Creedmoor for this hunting rifle, because there was another PRC on the line, and he got to see all the other things that customer was dealing with the extra recoil and the extra cost and all the other things that sort of accompany that extra 7% in increased velocity. And his confidence level, would he be confident in taking a game animal at distance? Well, he has to set his own limits there and what he can shoot and comfortably shoot to, the size of the animal, of course, how much energy you need on target. But he will enjoy that rifle 10 times more. He's going to shoot it a lot more. He's going to practice with it a lot more. And when it comes time to take that game animal at distance, he's going to have a lot more confidence in that he can make that shot. So that's a really cool part. So I just want to share with you our 5-10 rule, because we have this conversation quite often. And it's sort of my opinion and how I try to judge these things with the different cartridges and trying to at least have some type of rule of thumb on how to make a decision of whether or not I should upgrade to this cartridge or upgrade to that cartridge. And I sort of weigh all these pros and cons out, but that's the rule that we use. So I do want to take the time to say thanks again for joining us here at the podcast. I really enjoy spending the time to talk about the subjects and sharing everything. Our goal, of course, is to try to do some more interviews coming up in the future. I'm trying to set up some time to bring in some pretty cool interviews with some people that I enjoyed spending time with and learned so much from. That's something I'm really looking forward to do. We're going to make that happen soon. I do want to throw out there that we don't take any sponsorship here for the podcast. Would like to ask that if you would mind sharing it, or if you like the podcast, maybe post something nice up on our Facebook page. Our Facebook page, of course, is Wolf Precision Inc. Or if you wanted to leave a nice comment, send us an email at wolfprecision.net or contact@wolfprecision.net. We certainly enjoyed having you here. If you wanted to leave some comments or post up some likes on our Facebook page, we would certainly appreciate that, as well as sharing it. Any questions or anything that we can keep directing to, or some cool interviews that you would like us to do, if you have someone in particular that maybe we could try to bring on the show and ask some pointed questions, we would love to do that for you. So send us some emails on some comments or some questions or some people that you personally would like to hear from. I would love to take part in that and bringing something out that we could supply here to the show. So I want to take the time to say thank you again. I really appreciate everybody tuning into the podcast and taking the time to listen. I hope you're able to get some pretty cool stuff out of it. My name is Jamie Dotson. I'm your host, and you're listening to the Wolf Precision Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building Podcast.